Rob, how are things in New York right now?
Oh, well, they're pretty quiet, actually. I mean, I think 2 minutes ago, I hung the microphone out of the window. You would have heard a protest, very short protest. I live in Greenwich Village, so I live between Washington Square Park and Union Square. And so a lot of the protests have been gathering in Washington Square Park and then walking up to Union Square about 6, 7, 8 blocks, not very far. It seems quiet. It's quiet. I mean, look, half the people are wearing masks, and the other half are carrying placards. So everybody's got something to do.
You hear lots of people, of course, as we all do, fulsomely condemn the action of the Minneapolis police in that brutal incident.
Terrible.
I don't know you hear quite so many condemning the violence, the looting, and the rioting, do you?
No, I think again, it's like it's the proportion, really. I mean, I think the clashes with the police during demonstrations we're sort of used to. That stuff kind of happens. It doesn't really cause that much sort of introspection in the sense, because you have this highly sort of charged, tense atmosphere where a bunch of people are in riot gear and a bunch of people aren't, and that stuff happens. That's what, happens in France. It happens everywhere. The looting is, you can always tell a true conservative, because the looting seems to be outrageous, because that's a violation of private property, and their heads explode. And true liberals, true progressives, like, it's just stuff. It's insured. Why are you so worried about it? But
that's not the point, is it? I mean, the point is, the point is that where's the moral? I mean, you can protest about a cause, but stealing somebody else's property, that's just immoral, isn't it? That's just bad behavior.
It's also, and it sends a message that we are 25, 30 minutes from chaos. That really all it takes is for one neighborhood having a protest for the police to back up 2 blocks or disappear or let windows be smashed before it becomes a cascade. I mean, that's what happened in Los Angeles, what happened in New York, that's what happened in all the cities where it really hit hard, was this cascade of violence, cascade of looting. And at that point, it ceases to become a protest. The only people really arguing this point are, again, white progressives on, white progressive cable news channels or newspapers. The idea that whether looting is a form of protest. Every time they interview somebody in the news, I mean, I saw it in LA a lot. They would stop some guy with just a armful of Nikes or something and say, are you protesting the murder of George Floyd? And 9 times out of 10, he would look at them and say, who?
Yeah.
Like, no, I'm just going shopping. I just want some, and that's a bad sign that's a bad message to send to everyone. And I think it's going to take a while before people get over it. So certainly a while before businesses get over it.
What's going on here? I sort of detect, Rob, that there's this great well of frustration in America as there is here through the lockdown and being locked away, and that seems to be some of that coming out.
I think
but
so.
Also in America's case, certainly probably for half the country or so, a great well of frustration that Donald Trump is still president.
Yeah. It's remarkable to me, because the anti-Trump left just had this nervous breakdown when he was elected, and yet the map for them is very, very favorable. All they need to do is win. I mean, we're talking about an incredibly, probably the weakest president politically in modern times. He lost the popular vote. He won the electoral college states by, I think, 72,000 votes across 3 states. Really very weak. He's a terrible politician in many, many ways. He's incredibly unpopular with most sort of nonpartisan Americans. He squeaked in there, and he's kind of, just the way his nature, he's preternaturally unable to sort of reach out and unify people. It's just not one of the things he does. It's not I'm not making a moral criticism of him. He's a polemicist, and that's what he does. But the progressive left had this attitude that somehow they were never supposed to lose ever again after Obama. And when they lost, they went nuts, and all they needed to do was to beat him. That's all they had to do. And so they actually very, very, with great discipline and great success, they won back the House. So they won back the House of Representatives in the midterms in 2018. They came very close to winning back the Senate. They are now looking at a president who's extremely unpopular, whose poll numbers are very, very bad. In areas where he has been traditionally strong, he's now very weak. In America, it's very clear. If you don't like the president, all you have to do is beat him. That's it. And
Yeah.
it's so much easier to beat him than it is to impeach him. And so, but the Democrats instead spent all this time and treasure and energy and attention trying to do this crazy thing that, I mean, if you offered me $1 million, I really couldn't explain to you. And I follow the news. I could not explain to you what exactly it is that they think he did. I'm not quite sure. And I'm not much of a Trump fan. I'm not a Trump fan at all, as you know, if you listen to my podcast. I'm a Trump critic, but he didn't do the things that they spent millions of dollars and all this time and treasure trying to convict him of. Instead, they should have been honing their message and speaking to the American people. It just seems it's bananas to me, really. It's a form of a psychosis.
Yeah, and it seems to me that many people on the conservative side have also misread this. They thought, well, we've got our man in, right? He's the man who's going to do this. He's going to do that.
Right.
All over. We've won the victory now.
Right.
But I think it's patently clear now that that's not enough either. At some point, you have to step up and be the president for all America.
Well, right. I mean, that's the nice way to put it. The realistic, cynical way to put it is that the founders created a system of government which has lasted a long time. It's pretty strong, in which, in order to succeed at the top, you have to be sort of blandly centrist. You have to give a little and get a little. You have to make deals. You have to shake hands. You have to glad hand. You have to put your arm around somebody. You have to give them a drink. You have to be Lyndon Baines Johnson, right? You have to be. To be successful, you have to do that, and you have to be willing to water down your plans because you don't know who you're gonna have to compromise with, and this drives all partisans insane. I don't want to compromise, they say. No compromise. Well, that's okay. I understand that, but that's not the system we live in. The system that we have is a system where you're gonna. We always say about politics, it's like sausage. You don't want to see it get made because you don't want to know what goes into it. But that's the way the founders created America. That's the Constitution, and Trump does not understand that. I don't think Obama understood that either. I think we have a whole generation of presidents who just kind of think that the minute they're elected, that they somehow have their parliamentary leaders. They have the right to enact an agenda, and that's not how America works. All the voters do when they elect you is give you the microphone, but they'll pull it away from you any minute.
So is Joe Biden, the man to get the office of the presidency back on track, in your view?
Well, Biden is in somewhat of the same position as Trump's in. Every time Biden disappears for 2 weeks, his poll numbers go up. Every time Trump appears and does anything and says anything, his poll numbers go down. So the smartest thing for Biden to do is just to stay at home. And every now and then peek out the window and say a few things and then back up. Just people like the idea of Joe Biden more than they like Joe Biden. But this is a guy he's run a bunch of national campaigns. He's aware this is the closest he's ever going to come to becoming president of the United States. And he seems to be running a smart campaign. Now, as president, I have no idea. It'll be fun to watch, but it will be dangerous because he does seem to be losing it. I mean, there are moments where you're sort of looking at him and thinking, is he sort of like you're in the day room of the assisted living facility. But on the other hand, he's a good campaigner, and he's seen successful campaigns up close. So it'll be close, I think. It'll be either close or he's going to win in a walk.
What we're seeing, Rob, I think I find very, very disturbing is polarization of views that you've spoken of. But more than that, it's a sort of closed-mindedness. If you don't see the world this way. And there was an example this week, of course, of the opinion editor at the New York Times getting chopped because half the staff, or the whole staff, didn't like what he printed. Does that trouble you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he was essentially quit, but it was James Bennett. He quit, but was essentially fired. I mean, you can't fire me. I quit. Was sort of the system, because he published on the opinion editorial page an opinion that some people disagreed with, but that was certainly within the bound, but which many Americans did agree with, but was certainly within the bounds of debate. And the argument used wasn't even as honest as saying, well, we don't like that opinion, so we don't think you should print any opinions we don't like. It was more insidious. It was, reading that made us feel unsafe. Now, at some point, someone's going to have to stand up to those people and tell them to pull their pants up, and that there's no such thing as an editorial in the New York Times that should ever make you feel unsafe. There's nothing more impotent than an editorial in the New York Times, really. So the idea that you feel at risk from reading, and most people don't read the New York Times, so they don't read the op-ed page. But they were allowed to get away with that. And, and in a way, it was sort of like intellectual looting, right? It's like, once you let them do that, once you back up and say, okay, you can break that window and that window, you can get that editor fired, and you're going to get that reporter turfed out, you can cancel this or that person. Once you let that happen, there will be a cascade of these events. Now, as a conservative, I will be laughing up my sleeve, because it's always the far left attacking moderate left, and the people in the moderate left are like pulling their hair out saying, I thought, fellas, we were all friends, right? And it gives you a huge opportunity, if you're not on the far left, a giant business opportunity to write and print thoughts and words and opinions that are provocative and well written, but are interesting to the vast center around the globe. Most people, you go to a bar and you talk about politics, there's always 2 or 3 guys there that are going to just be jerks and are like are party nuts. They're partisans, and they'll tell you why their party is good and your party's bad. But most people are sitting there just they just want to watch the game, drink a beer, and shrug, and like, I got troubles of my own. Those people are a market, and someone's going to find them.
Yeah, because I think it goes to what you were saying earlier, this self-importance of the intelligentsia. They think that they're the knights in shining armor. They're St. George. Right. They're St. George looking for the dragon.
Yeah, and you're the dragon, by the way. If you don't know who the dragon is, that's you. Yes. That's right. Well, look, if you look at old movies in the 30s and 40s and even the 50s, right? Reporters, there are always reporters in movies, right? And they're always cynical. And they're always like, they're wearing hats and this press thing, and they're always like, they don't have a dog in the fight, these reporters. They're just there to report the facts. If it, the old thing, if it bleeds, it leads. They're just trying to sell papers, right? Somewhere along the line, that reporter who didn't really have a polemic, didn't have an axe to grind, he became a journalist. They don't call themselves reporters anymore. They call themselves journalists, mostly because they don't report the news. They report their perspective on the news. They write in a journal of sort of therapeutic essays to try to get you to change your mind. I don't know when I think it happened right here. I read around after Watergate, where the idea was, well, we're more powerful than the president of the United States. The downside of that is that you just have to listen to these sort of simpering cretins tell you all sorts of things about why you were wrong about everything. And the upside of it is we're watching them all now. All those guys are getting fired and turfed out by the young guns in their own newsrooms who hate them. So,
I think Watergate has got a lot to answer for. That was the moment where journalism changed. I think every journalist thought they could crack the big one and unseat a president.
Insufferable, right? Insufferable. And the hypocrisy loop is getting tighter and tighter. I mean, even in the last 6 weeks, what have we seen? We've seen people tell us that the WHO is a brilliant and well-run organization, and then, well, not so much. And then 2 days ago, the WHO revealed that the new study says that if you're asymptomatic, if you have COVID, if you have the COVID virus, if you have it, but you're asymptomatic, the likelihood of you giving it to somebody is incredibly rare. Now we've been locked in our houses, wearing gloves and masks for 2.5 months because they've been telling us the opposite. And now they sort of said, well, it's probably very rare. So half the people now who have used to be saying the World Health Organization, the conservatives saying the WHO is filled with losers and like liars and they shouldn't be trusted, are now saying, look at this WHO study, and it's they're brilliant and they're like trustworthy. And then you have the progressive left who've been saying for 2 months the WHO is this wonderful sort of UN NGO that we should be supporting, are now saying, well, obviously there are problems in the WHO, simply because they came up with a study that they didn't agree with. So the magnificent tight hypocrisy we see now is, it's almost like somebody's trying to tell us a joke and we're still not getting it. If you're a religious person, you can only assume that this is God trying to tell us a joke, trying to make us realize how dumb we are without actually coming down and telling us. And we keep missing the point.
Yeah, I think one of the markers of where we are is when you look back at old television shows like the one you helped create, Cheers, the comedy series. There's a certain, I don't know, innocence about it, but they're not sort of so charged and full of that sort of political earnestness, are they?
No, we didn't. I was trying to think of, I don't think we ever had talked about politics ever. I think we had
an apolitical comedy.
I believe we had the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff on once. And I'm not sure why, but he was a friend of somebody, and so we put him on. And that was about it. No, because look, our argument was, I want this thing to run forever. If you're watching it, if you were watching reruns now and somebody's talking about the current the George H.W. Bush administration, how boring would that be?
That's right, and you presumably wanted a bigger audience. You wanted a big. You're not going to get that if you.
And my rule is always I always say this to writers I work with. Our job is to make people laugh and maybe love the characters and think about the human condition. It's not to give people homework. Nobody pays for homework. And if you give your audience homework, they respond by saying, okay, click, not going to watch this. So keep dancing is what I try to tell them. Keep making it funny. And if you can just do that, that's hard enough. Do that. Don't worry about making anybody a better person. That's up to them.
Yeah, well, you do that. Your writings at National Review very. I love the way you've been doing these scripts of Zoom conferences at the New York Times and so forth. Very
look, we're all on Zoom, so we all know what they look like. So
yeah.
Exactly, and the truth is that there's a treasure trove somewhere for future historians or current troublemakers to find some incredibly interesting media conversations, probably the New York Times, that were had over Zoom, in which almost every bad impression, nightmare view of the liberal media will come true. If you really listen to them, it's actually a crackpot right-wing conspiracy nut. It turns out they're right. I think that's what we discover.
So let's go to the media today. Sometimes on the those on the centre right get the feeling that they don't have any of the media on their side, or very, very little of it. They feel that the media's against them. But I think more and more that's not true, is it? It's not just that we have programs like Fox News or Sky News here, but what we're doing now, we're creating a new audience, right. And people are coming.
No, I think it's true. Once you no longer have to rely on the gatekeepers to tell you what happened, or to discuss it, or to help analyze it, why would you ever go to them again? And the solution, really, for them, for the big papers and the big channels, is to simply tell the news, to say what happened. But that's boring. They don't want to do that. They're like, well, I'd want to tell you how to think. The truth is, I don't know many reporters who really want to tell you what happened. They want to tell you what to think about what happened. And the problem with that is that that's not what the customer wants. And so they've created this entire movement. What's Twitter? What's Zoom? What are these things? What's Facebook even? It's a place for people to exchange their views. And they've ceded the high ground. They've ceded, you and I couldn't with a straight face say, well, the thing about the New York Times is, if it's there, it's factual. We'd laugh. We would roll our eyes and laugh. It'd be a joke. And we'd be right to laugh.
I always like to end on a redemptive note, Rob. And
Sorry.
So let's do that. I mean, there's some good news to celebrate in America this week.
Yeah.
A little oasis of calm, sensible, rational discussion. The Ricochet podcast is about
There
to
you go.
celebrate its 500th episode. Tell us
Yes.
about Ricochet.
So Ricochet is a site that I co-founded with my friend Peter Robinson, who was a speechwriter for Ronald Reagan. And we decided that early on that the web was sort of filled this horrible cesspool. You know, Peter, by the way, is very sort of, you know, prim and proper young man. You know, he's like, I don't think I've ever heard him curse. So I have to do twice as much just to balance it out. But we decided it was sort of a cesspool, so we created Ricochet, which is a conversation site for people on the center right. And the theory was you pay a little bit of money to join the club. And it's a free market solution if you want to keep the riffraff out and the nasty conversation. You know, everybody is a member of the club. I mean, nobody pays to join a club and then messes it up. You treat it. You have skin in the game, as we say. You treat it with respect because you own it.
Thanks so much for joining us on Water Cooler Live, and we look forward to welcoming you back. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.